Hello and welcome everybody to this Russia in the World session. I think it's going to be one of the most exciting sessions taking place here in Davos. We've got a fantastic panel who I'm going to introduce you to in just a few moments. This panel we're going to look at basically in broad terms Russia's position in the world in geopolitical terms, but also economic. Thank you so much to the World Economic Forum for hosting this. What a year it's been. This time last year, the future for Russia looked a lot bleaker than it does now. Russia's asserted itself on the geopolitical stage to the consternation of some, but it also has a nascent economic recovery. The question is that recovery going to gain momentum this year? But there are some big opportunities ahead, possibly some pitfalls, which we're going to be discussing together. But for real change, there is consensus among many economics that there is going to be a need for real structural reform in Russia's economy, and I'm sure the gentleman here will be able to tell us a lot about that. There are also opportunities. Of course, the elephant in the room is Donald Trump. What will that represent? And we'll be discussing that too. But also European elections. There could be a shift in Europe with some key European elections, which could move Europe closer to Russia. I'd say if 2016 taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. Let me introduce you to our guests straight away. On my left, of course, we have Mr. Igor Shuvalov, who is the first Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian government. He's held that post since 2008 when Vladimir Putin took office as Prime Minister during the presidency of Mr. Dmitry Medvedev. Since 2012, Igor Shuvalov has carried on in that same capacity in government, with Dmitry Medvedev as Prime Minister, of course. Mr. Shuvalov has overall responsibility, in general terms, of economic affairs. We're also delighted to have Mr. Miroslav Lajcek on the panel. He's the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia, so an important European voice on this panel. He's previously held the post of Deputy Prime Minister, but has got a wealth of experience in international affairs with key engagement in EU and UN issues. It's great to have Mr. Kirill Dmitriev with us. He is the CEO of the Russia Direct Investment Fund. Now, that was created just 5 years ago by the Russian government and the presidency. And the key role of that is to get sovereign wealth funds to invest alongside RDIF in promising Russian companies, but also leading Russian companies. Mr. Dmitry Kostigin, fantastic to have you with us. Dmitry Kostigin is the chairman of Yulmart. Yulmart is Russia's leading e-commerce retailer, very well known in Russia. For those who don't know it so well, I saw a great description of it by your CEO, who said it's a combination of IKEA and Amazon. And last but not least, of course, great to have Mr. Ray Dalio with us. Ray Dalio is the founder and chairman of the investment firm Bridgewater Associates, which is the largest hedge fund in the world, no less. And Ray Dalio brings absolutely fantastic economic perspective to this discussion. He's created a model where he looks at economies like machines, and I think that perspective is going to be extremely interesting. So we're going to begin this by just going to all of you to see how you see Russia's economy, but also geopolitically, how you see Russia faring in 2017. And I'd like to begin with you, Deputy Prime Minister.
Economically, this year will be better for us than 2016 was. The main issues that accompanied us in 2016 and from the end of 2014 were very vibrant, and that stage is behind us. We've dealt with that. We recently in Moscow had a forum which joined together famous economists from all over the world, and that was their position. They said that Russia has passed its very severe times, difficult times, when we encountered external and internal shocks, and today the situation is not so bad. Today we have achieved growth, and we hope that this year we will grow by 1 to 2%. There was a very important meeting held yesterday, and there was a very important decision taken that we cannot afford to spend our oil money, and that everything that we earn from selling crude oil at the price above $40 will be reserved in our reserve funds. And we are not going to spend that money via our budget, and that will allow us to ensure greater transparency in terms of pricing and less volatility for the currency, the ruble, and that is what people want from us when they open new enterprises and when they want to export more. So things look quite healthy, and frankly speaking, currently now we are in a situation where we do not have any bubbles, not in the property, the real estate market, and not in the stock exchange, so no bubbles in those areas. And we are very much hoping that foreign investors will flow as a consequence of that.
You've obviously been listening to this. What's your take on Russia's economy in 2017?
Well, I think it's difficult to predict because Russia is part of the global world and we are facing many uncertainties. From the European Union perspective, of course, it's the Brexit and our negotiations, the role of the new US administration. Then there are the problems that we have inherited and carry on from the previous year, migration or the terrorism. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when it comes to our relationship with Russia, we have the continuous issue of sanctions and the absence of dialogue or absence of a format, of a framework. It's very bad that there is practically no legal framework for the engagement with Russia, which is not really normal, and neither party is showing appetite to change that, which I don't think is normal, and would be good if we are able, in the course of 2017, to define what the relationship is, to go beyond no business as usual, because after almost 3 years, it would be good to know what the no business as usual means.
Это не совсем так. Мы со своей стороны все время.
That's not quite so. From our side, we continuously express our desire and our wish to cooperate. The Russian side has never said that we will sever dialogue or that we refuse to participate in any format. We had an initiative of the EU and other countries. As soon as your wish to cooperate will be formulated, we will immediately get down to this cooperation at the level of the government. We are willing to participate in any type of dialogue.
Yes, let us deliver on the Normandy group, on the Minsk plan, and then, of course, we are back to normal situation.
Kirill Dmitriev, do you feel that you're coming close to a turning point in Russia?
Yeah, I think we are beyond the turning point, and I think we'd like to debunk some myths that exist about Russia. One of the myths is that Russia's economy is hurt by sanctions. It was, but no longer so. As Vice Minister Shuvalov mentioned, we'll have a growth of around 2%. A very important deal for us was OPEC deal, which stabilized oil prices and really reduced fluctuation of oil and uncertainty. As a result, our stock market is up 50% in dollar terms in the last year. It's a very significant result. One of our companies we invested in, Detsky Mir, will take it public. Revenue last year grew 30%, EBITDA grew 50%. So Russia is beyond the turning point. We believe we'll have major growth, and even if sanctions are not lifted. Now, we believe they may be lifted, but even if sanctions are not lifted, Russia in a very good position and went through this crisis very well.
Just a quick question before I go to our other panelists. You had a very interesting meeting with Donald Trump's economic advisor. What does that herald?
Well, we are quite optimistic on communication with Trump administration. We believe that they treat Russia with respect, and that's very important. And it's very important to have dialogue on issues. And I still remember, as Vice Prime Minister Shuvalov 2 years ago mentioned here in the audience about Russia in light of sanctions, it will be united with President Putin moving forward despite sanctions. And this is what we hear as understanding of some of the people of Trump administration. Mr. Scaramucci also said he understands that sanctions actually united Russia rather than reduced popularity of the president. So we want to have a good dialogue, and we believe we have a basis for this dialogue.
Okay, well, we'll get back to those questions of sanctions and Donald Trump later on in the discussion, but I'd like to bring Mr. Kostigin in and get a sense of business confidence in Russia. How's the business community feeling?
Я начал заниматься бизнесом еще в 1988 году, еще при Михаиле Горбачеве.
I started to do business under Gorbachev in '88, and at that time I was buying jeans in a market in Moscow, and then I was reselling them in a tiny town that I come from, which was a criminal offense under the Soviet administration, by the way. So I have comparisons that I can draw. You can say whatever you like, but together with my business partner, we have been investing hundreds of millions of dollars in Russian industry in the last few years. Yes, of course, one can be afraid of black swans, that fable about a clever fisherman that was afraid of everything. But then, of course, you can search for golden swans. So I think the future will bring golden swans mostly in the territory of the Russian Federation.
Is that there is an economy in transition. And if we take the way you look at economies as machines, what stands out for you about Russia?
Russia is a country with incredible potential. For those who don't know, I'm somewhat like a doctor. I'm not ideological, I'm not political. I just compare countries one to another. And across measures, I have a health index that looks across countries. And there are three major things that drive whether an economy is going to be good. The first is, are you blessed with natural resources? Russia has more natural resources by far than any country, so per capita it should be the richest country in the world. Second, the most important influence is how expensive educated people are. It has a highly educated population that is very cheap in world terms and therefore should be very competitive, very attractive. Another blessing. The third most important influence is level of indebtedness. The level of indebtedness in Russia is one of the lowest in the world. So what we have is a country with all of those elements, and then it has some problems and some challenges to that. And I think the biggest challenge to that, well, we'll go into that. It is a country in which its development of its capital markets is very undeveloped. The ability to borrow and lend and invest is very low. The issues in terms of capital rights and property rights are a problem. So it has a great deal of potential. When I look at the last year, or last couple of years, I'd say it had two big problems. We all know. It had sanctions and it had oil. Those problems are behind us. When I think of Prime Minister Shivalov's comments, I'm exactly right. They have no bubbles at all. What the real situation, I think, here is the question of whether you can get those problems behind you. Economically, it's behind, and you will have a growth rate that'll be in the vicinity of what you said, and 1 or 2%, I agree. But this is a moment of potential to think about the next 10 years and to restructure the economy to live up to its potential, I think.
What do you say to that, Deputy Prime Minister?
Я абсолютно согласен. Просто
I fully agree, of course. You think we're not thinking about structural reforms? Of course we've been thinking about those, and we were developing them when oil was expensive, and then we talked about that when the oil price fell, and the program that we will be developing in May, and we'll have a preliminary presentation of that. There's a number of public think tanks and non-governmental think tanks are preparing their own agendas as well. And where do we see the main obstacles for our economic growth? And where do we see important actions that are necessary for this year? Well, of course, we're looking further than this year and next year in order to make that growth sustainable, to move it from 2% to something a bit more acceptable. We think 2% for Russia is a bit low as a growth rate. And now what is in our thinking, what's in the forefront of our thinking? Well, it is that we should not make any mistakes in order that growth might stumble. So we need responsible macroeconomic policies. We haven't made any mistakes, and we're not planning to make any mistakes. Now, it could be painful, but we will continue going along this very strict policy. Now, if we look a little further, the main problem is the human capital, education levels of the population, skills that are necessary in the market. So what should we do for our education system and for our labour market in order for that to adapt and be competitive in the world? Well, we understand that we are losing out in terms of competitiveness, and that is a real challenge, and we are trying to deal with that. There are many ideas, many proposals to deal with that. So we're not just talking about the budget needed for the education system, but also the motivation for industry to train people, to give them skills, and to give signals to the market that they're interested in working with better technology. That's another issue. In terms of structural reform in the long term, then we have to make checks to ensure that we don't go for one extreme or another, that we need to discuss this publicly, and perhaps we will do this in the remaining time of this political cycle, and the next political cycle will implement that agenda.
This brings me to you, because it's very interesting. You're obviously tapped into the younger generations who are tech-orientated. What do you see they want to change? And you as a businessman, what are the main hurdles you're facing?
Ой, у меня есть любимая песенка моя.
Well, I have a favorite little song of mine, rather boring for those who are not in the know, but this is to do with Russian accounting standards. There was an idea that we should move at least to cut Russia. A couple of people have forgotten all about this system, but we must move on to international accounting standards. That's my favorite lament. And we should move this out of the remit of the Ministry of Finance. I can't forgive Mr. Kudrin that he never took it away from the ministry and made it an unusual no material asset economy and overdevelopment of IT. The economy owes its success more to accounting system than to anything else.
Yes, indeed, we are simultaneously working two systems, the Russian and the international accounting systems. We have started with state assets on that, so that's our first responsibility. And then in 2017, we will be determining that dividends are reported only according to international systems, so we are sending the right signals.
But Mr. Dmitriev, do you feel that there is an enhanced trust when it comes to Russia? And you mentioned sanctions, or you have all mentioned sanctions. Do you feel, in terms of the European Union in particular, that cracks are forming there, that you lack the unity in the EU to maintain sanctions on Russia?
Well, ever since the sanctions were introduced almost 3 years ago, there has been speculations about the cracks in the unity of the European Union. But up until now, the EU was always able to extend the sanctions. There was no lack of unity on that issue.
Will Slovakia continue to push for sanctions?
Slovakia continues to say that we are not fans of sanctions. We don't think that sanctions are the best instrument to achieve our goals, but the top priority for us is the EU unity, and we will never go against this unity. Speaking about the sanctions, yes, they should be the policy tool, not the policy in itself. The sanctions were introduced in reaction to the violation of international law by Russia, by the annexation of Crimea. The conditions for lifting the sanctions are well known. I wish we get there. I wish we will be able to go back to normalization of relations. But right now, I understand it's popular for journalists to speculate who is going to break the unity of the European Union. At the beginning, people didn't want to believe that 28 member states...
The sanctions were put in place for a particular reason, obviously, relating to Ukraine mostly. Will that be set aside, therefore? Is that the feeling you're getting?
No, that's not the feeling I'm getting. On the contrary, the sanctions are directly linked to the implementation of Minsk agreements. And there has been not much of progress on that one, so therefore we still have time until July, and I wish to see progress on Minsk implementation.
Without implementation, you'd say maintain...
No, that's, I think the European Union is very clear on that point.
But Kirill Dmitriev, you've said yourself that sanctions aren't really a problem in Russia, that they probably helped the economy.
Well, a couple of points. First of all, sanctions did not achieve their objectives, which was to change the policy, and they actually unified Russia to move forward. Lots of our businesses have restructured, and we can do very well without sanctions. As I said, the growth will continue. But we believe sanctions are bad because they cost European business around 100 billion euros in value. That means employment is low. It means that revenues of German and other businesses are lower because they're not working with Russia, which is a very natural partner. And we believe with Trump administration, it's possible to start having discussions on reduction of sanctions because we can do so much with the US together. Imagine the world where Russia and the US jointly fight terrorism. We had very difficult relationship with Turkey when they had an incident, but we were able to completely change this relationship in about 6 months, and now we are jointly with Turkey fighting terrorism in Syria. Imagine what it would be like if we do the same thing with the US. So we believe that the thinking will be changing in the US, the thinking will be changing in Europe, and that's a good thing.
Поскольку я в правительстве, то вот такой позитивный настрой,
который Кирилл
демонстрирует, я не могу разделить. Может быть, рынок рассчитывает на то, что
positive statements by Mr. Kirill, I cannot share that. Perhaps the market is expecting the improvement of our relationship with the US, but we base our plans on possible continued severe external conditions, and our agenda is formed on the basis of continued sanctions. If they're lifted, then the situation will improve, but we operate on the basis of continued sanctions. And you mentioned that there's a possible breach in the European Union, and some of those might start lifting the sanctions. There's a lot of public speculation on that point. Then I can tell you that, honestly, the Russian Federation has never been interested in discord between European countries. We are keen on Europe remaining united and strong. It's painful for us to watch Brexit and other phenomena. We are quite happy for the EU to be unanimous. If we look to the long term, then we want a partner that is strong with its own institutions and no cracks appearing between EU countries.
I know you want to cut in. I also have just a quick question for you. How do you evaluate sanctions on Russia? Can you put a cost on them in terms of the economy?
Yeah, the biggest impact of sanctions was the cutting back of lending so that they didn't receive the money to borrow. And that was quite a bit of money. It was about $220 billion. And that is a two-edged sword. They adjusted to those. So when you have a shock, and you don't get the money lent, I think that this, while it creates a short-term shock, it also probably created a realization that there's too much foreign currency denominated debt and exposures. And it created an adjustment, just like Prime Minister Shivalov said, that adjustment has been made. And when you think about that and you think about the oil price, it was another shock. Those are temporary shocks. So those are past them. I mean, so I would agree that it would be better if the sanctions were lifted, and it would be better for everybody. But in addition, I think the real question is the development of their capital markets so that they don't have so much dependence on foreign capital. If you contrast the development of China and the development of Russia, you know, Russia's come an enormous way over the last 16 years. So you have to see its progress. But if you compare that with China's progress, it's been much less. One of the reasons is the development of a local currency denominated debt market and the development of its economy. So I think that there are lessons here to be learned in terms of developing a capital market internally that doesn't have as much dependence on foreign capital and I think will work better. So I think in the long run, it'll be beneficial to create that independence. And I think in the short run, the adjustment's been made.
Kirill Dmitriev, I'd like your reaction to what Ray Dalio said, and also to give us some perspective on who you see Russia's partners being, and maybe mentioning China here. As you know, is that relationship going to develop in 2017 significantly?
Yes, I think Ray Dalio has really great ideas. And I think increasing debt in Russia, domestic debt, is definitely very positive. And what we've been doing, we've been forming partnership with different countries. We have great relationship with China, and we jointly invested with them in lots of things. We have great relationship with Saudi Arabia. We have some Saudis here in the audience, which is very important for us to jointly invest. We have great relationship with Middle East. So frankly, what happened when European companies and some US companies pulled out, lots of Asian companies went in. And there is lots of strategic work being done with China. And obviously, Russian economy benefits from the growth we see having been resumed in China in the last 6 months. So Russia is interested, and our fund is interested to partner with European Union. We have done an investment in ARC International, which is a French company creating lots of jobs in France. So I think joint investments is really important to create jobs, because job creation is a big item on Trump's agenda, on European agenda, and on Russian agenda.
On China.
Yeah.
Поскольку в правительстве я отвечаю за этот диалог, два слова просто добавлю.
In the government, I'm responsible for partnerships, and on China, I'd like to say a few words. Our relationship with the People's Republic of China is developing in an extraordinarily positive way. Strategic dialogue at the level of top leaders is very good, but in terms of strategic agreements, we have a border agreement and on oil and gas. But when the sanctions were applied against the Russian Federation, we started to work with the Chinese, and we agreed that we will work at all levels with them, members of our government, our family friends now with each other, and we have very good links with China beyond just the government links. Chinese companies come to Russia, they open up new businesses there. We are helping Russian companies to export their products to China, and where certification or other state support is required, private companies are doing that now. So we are continuing to witness the Chinese banks' position that they don't want trouble. They do watch the sanctions regime very carefully, but in terms of the relationship at every level, in every sphere, it's very interesting, and also for the Chinese.
Did you want to cut in?
Just going to add one thing, that the development property rights, the size of government is a challenge. Governments are less efficient. Those are the challenges that I think are important. I was just wondering what Prime Minister Chavalov thinks about those.
In terms of these challenges that you mention, we have discussed them widely, and we accept and understand them. But at the same time, I do have to say, I have to be fair, that in terms of a not very efficient governance and property rights, the Russian Federation in 2012 was 120th in the World Bank ratings, and now we're on the position of number 40 in that same list. So if we look at the specific criteria, we have moved forward a great deal. Singapore, for example, is very critical of what's happening in the world. 3 or 4 years ago, when I visited there, they were talking about property rights and inefficient government. Well, last year, when we had the Intergovernmental Commission, we were all sitting on the same panel, and they kept saying that there had been significant improvements in property rights and business climate and doing business with Russia. But the overall picture is changing. Yes, there are challenges, but we'll tackle them.
The development. I think Russia's got to be looked in the context of its evolution. And it has so much potential, but there's been those improvements.
But another issue, and I'd like to bring in Dmitry Kostigin here, is corruption, is it not? And I want to know how in terms of a businessman, how that hampers your work in Russia?
У нас бизнес уже относительно большого масштаба, поэтому, честно говоря, даже уже...
Our business is relatively large scale, so we haven't come across any such matters for a long time. I don't know. We have professional lawyers, professional consultants. St. Petersburg is our home base, our native town. The administration of the city, the government of the city is transparent and understandable. So I don't quite understand. We work in retail, we work in manufacturing for private consumption. It's mainly a business-to-consumer platform. So we don't depend on licenses or permits or subsidies. Where we can get benefits, we'll get the benefits.
I'd like now to start talking about Donald Trump and his potential effects on Russia, because we've got a much more business-led administration. And in terms of deal-making, I'd like to understand from, well, our Russian contingent and maybe Ray Dalio, how they see that progressing in 2017, and whether you were able to, if you're going to permit yourself to forecast a little bit about how things will go, because Kirill Dmitriev, I think you're going to have a US delegation arriving to Russia. It was one of the first high-level meetings of that kind that took place here in Davos.
Yes, we'll bring a US delegation in the spring of 2017 containing the largest funds and the largest companies from the US. And this dialogue is very, very important, because one of the problems we have with the US is the mutual investment level and mutual trade is much less than with the European Union. So basically, we don't have enough of commercial and enough of investment dialogue, and we believe it's very important. And we would love to have Ray and other people, be there as dialogue partners to discuss what can be done jointly with Russia. And by the way, we have one example of a company where Titan International, a US company, invested with us in tires. It became the lowest cost manufacturer in the world of agricultural tires. And now we're exporting to European Union, to other places. So there are good examples of US companies doing very well in Russia, and we believe that should be encouraged, given Trump's administration agenda of job creation, in the US, and being able to access Russian market for US companies.
And Deputy Prime Minister, how do you see that relationship going? Is there going to be a greater emphasis at the beginning on the economy, or will it be more on security?
Еще раз,
Once again, I'll say that in our government we have a very cautious approach to any statement that there is a possible scenario of development with anybody. We have to work based on the notion that the situation will be complex. And there is upside potential. We have a good export agenda. We work with Asian markets. We have our agenda on economic openness, and we'll continue doing that. So a lack of trade with the US is not an obstacle here. There is a huge interest towards cooperation with Russia on open economic zones, on buying and selling goods to us. My personal opinion on this is it is much more important for the Americans to deal with the global security agenda. And I think that if that dialogue is built up, then economic relations will get a serious boost.
I was just thinking the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is in about 6 months. Could we expect Donald Trump to be dropping in there?
Well, I would like to invite you all, first of all, to the 3rd of June, St. Petersburg Economic Forum, the main event for our calendar year. And the Russian agenda should be discussed there among the best experts and politicians. It's the president's event, the Russian president's event. They can talk to him directly and talk to him, the members of government as well, members of local government will all work with that forum. The bankers will work there and through the internet. Please come there and you will learn a lot about Russia. There you'll learn a lot more than you will do so at Davos, where it's seen through an international context. Were Trump to come, I have my doubts, but we would be delighted to welcome him. and going back to the global security agenda first and then economic situation second.
Here at Davos is this pullback from globalization, and it does almost seem paradoxical also with Donald Trump, who is, wanting to push ahead with the more protectionist measures. So as Russia opens out, how do you see that dynamic working?
I think that the big issues are political issues that have stood in the way of the relationship developing economically. So I think that they'll supersede anything else. So as we move forward, I think that there's a lot of benefit. As I say, Russia is very cheap, meaning, in other words, good value in Russia, particularly if there's development. And I think that the one thing that Donald Trump has done is he's changed the world outlook for growth. The world outlook for growth is going to be greater because there's a greater business environment. Now, how that becomes manifest in the politics that will allow the economics to develop, I'm not sure. I hope that the politics will be dealt with so that the economic potential can be realized.
Mr. Dmitriev, you advocate a dual-track policy when it comes to Russia. Can you explain that to us and how that could help us understand this context better when it comes to the European Union, possibly the US as well?
Sure. Dual-track policy or dual-track approach to Russia is currently the official position of the European Union, reflecting the two things. First, that Russia is a global reality, is a global player, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, nuclear power. There are a number of global problems and issues that cannot be solved without Russia. So we need to engage with Russia on all these issues. And at the same time, we have the problem that I already mentioned, that was the reason for introducing the sanctions. And therefore, we want to engage more with Russia on all the issues of common interest or of global responsibility. And in parallel track, we would like to achieve some progress also on the issue of Ukraine and Crimea so that we will be able to lift the sanctions. So this is it, and I really personally disagree with the fact that from the perspective of the European Union, we have no political dialogue and we have no contractual framework. There is not a single agreement. We have agreements with all kinds of agreements with almost every country in the world, but the legal basis for EU-Russia relationship is actually our membership in the WTO, which is not normal. So it would be good to achieve a level of engagement that will reflect the global role of both the European Union and Russian Federation. So we are facing the global problems and global challenges, and it would be good to have Russia fully integrated into the global effort.
Deputy Prime Minister, who's going to take that first step?
Мне нечего сказать дополнительно к тому, что я сказал.
There's nothing for me to say, there's nothing for me to add to what I've already said. We did not curb our relations with the EU. We think there is a legal framework for dialogue. And among others, this framework has been mobilized twice in a year for the ministers to meet and the commissioners from the EU to meet, and there were high-level meetings. And we have this legal framework. Nobody has cancelled it, and it hasn't lost its legal significance. We were discussing a new image with the EU. We're not discussing it now. It's not being developed at the moment, but the old framework has not disappeared in any case. And the legal mechanisms will never force anybody to talk to each other. For that, we need the interests of the EU, and the EU continues waiting for the Minsk agreement to be fulfilled, and Russia has no influence. And that's a bit bizarre because the Ukraine has to bear some responsibility under the Minsk agreement. This is a political agenda. This is not my particular topic. I don't want to talk about that so much, but it's not so easy. If we're asked why the Minsk agreement isn't being implemented, you need to ask all of the participants in the Minsk agreement why it is not being implemented. It's much more complex than the media portrays, but we are ready and we are willing, through bilateral interaction with the EU countries, ready and willing to work between the government and the Commission people. The mechanisms are there. We should stop trying to scare each other off. Nobody's going to achieve anything through sanctions. We will continue to take our sovereign policy and will will continue undertaking that sovereign policy. It is impossible to change our course through sanctions. The sooner everyone understands that, the better.
Okay, we're going to, in just a minute, take some questions from the audience. Before I do, I've just got one quick question for Kirill Dmitriev. In your perspective as CEO of the Russia Direct Investment Fund, and briefly now, but what are your goals in Europe?
Well, we would like to bring in capital from Europe into Russia, because lots of, for example, middle-sized German businesses can benefit by going investing into Russia and growing their revenue. We would also like to invest in Europe jointly with our partners, because our partners are the leading sovereign wealth funds of the world. And we have produced positive return in dollars for them for the last 5 years. So our goal is to build partnerships with the leading investment banks and banks of Europe and invest jointly, and we believe that's a good thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to be taking questions from the audience. Before I do, I would like to thank our Euronews viewers who've been watching this live on Euronews and invite you to go over to euronews.com, where you'll be receiving and hearing more about what's being said in this room. So thanks so much for having been with us. So we've got a few hands.
So we are wrapping up now the coverage from Davos, from the World Economic Forum. We are able to just give you a quick rundown of what's been said from the Russian side. They're optimistic and they're planning growth. And we have heard also that Russia has a lot of natural resources and has a lot of potential.
Where the Ukraine peace process